Welcome, everyone, to the Modern Day Overthinker podcast. My name is Collin, and I'm your host. This week's episode is with Zane Landin. Zane is a mental health advocate, such as myself. He has major depressive disorder, such as myself, and he has worked with NAMI in the past. And NAMI is a organization that I really love and try to support the best I can when I can, and love to see other advocates out there, especially men in the space, because there are men out there that are sharing their stories and experiences, but we are dominated by women when it comes to mental health advocacy, and which it's not a competition, but we talked about the importance of men's mental health and the stigma and the challenges, and also the importance of storytelling when addressing social issues and identities and mental health, all that good stuff, and the therapeutic value of sharing stories with one another, as that's very helpful and is therapeutic for many people that are suffering and dealing with mental health challenges. So, without further ado, this is episode number 84 with Zane Landin. Welcome, everyone, to the Modern Day Overthinker podcast. My name is Collin, and I am your host. Today's episode is with Zane Landin. Zane is joining me virtually from DC. Thank you, Zane, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about the scheduling conflicts. It's when you're a guy like me who just doesn't know how to balance his life and working on it, I appreciate people being flexible. So,
Of
yeah,
course.
I wanted to dive into a few different things with you, but I want to start off by giving you the chance to introduce yourself, let people know who you are, what you're doing. I know you're an advocate like myself, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure, yeah, thank you. My name is Zane Landin. I currently live in Washington, D.C. I work for the National Geographic Society as an internal communication specialist. It's actually my first job out of university. I just graduated, well, just May of 2022 is when I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Communication. And so, hence that, I am really passionate about communications and storytelling, how it can be used to leverage different social issues and different identities, making sure that they're properly represented, all those things. And also, I just think that we're all natural storytellers in our own way. And I think storytelling is really what keeps us grounded, what reminds us of those like simpler times in life, especially when I think about my childhood, I think about the stories
Oh,
and
yeah.
the journeys that I've had. And so, so there's that component, and I'm also just a huge mental health advocate. I've done different work with different organizations. I had the opportunity to go and be invited to the White House. I met President Biden. There's actually a photo of a selfie of me and the
I
other
saw
advocates
that.
chosen.
Yeah,
Yeah, for this specific opportunity. And so a lot of exciting work I've got to do that I've had the chance to do in mental health, and it's really exciting.
that's really cool. Yeah, I saw that. I was just looking at your Instagram, and I was like, oh, so that was at the White House.
That was at the White House.
That's really cool. Uh, well, I'll have to dive into that for just a
Yeah.
couple quick questions later, but just to get your insight on that visit, because that's a whole experience in itself.
Mhm.
But yeah, so tell me a little bit about your experience with mental health and why it's so personal to you, and you feel like you want to share your story as well as getting other people's stories out there too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate, but I'm also a person with a lived experience, and so I know that there are many advocates that don't have lived experience, which is great. We
Yeah.
always need allies and supporters, but I do have the experience of going through depression and anxiety, like a lot of people.
Hmm.
Um, but there was something different about me. I actually had a mental health condition. I wasn't diagnosed for a while until recently, actually, probably like last year,
It
where I was
happens.
diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It wasn't a huge shock, to be honest, because I feel like it gave a good explanation.
Mm,
Like I think that that's what a diagnosis can serve. Like some people might question, like, what's the point of getting a diagnosis if I already know I have it? Well, again, you're still speculating. You don't know if you have it. And if you do, you should probably talk to a doctor because they're going to give you the best course of action for
yep.
treatment if there is treatment. So I think there's always, it's always good to have a diagnosis. And for people that can't get diagnosed, not everyone has access to get one. Um, and even if you don't have a diagnosis, there's still support and help out there. You don't have to have a diagnosis to get medication. And so that there's always options. And so when I was diagnosed, and that's what I was looking for a diagnosis, because I've been struggling with depression, anxiety for a long time, that I really wanted like an explainer, like something that explained how I felt, why I felt this way. Not it was just me, I'm not just too sensitive, quote unquote. And so yeah, I was diagnosed, and it was an interesting feeling. Like
Yeah.
it was nice again to have the explainer, but then I was also kind of like depressed from it. I thought I
Ooh.
was gonna feel really empowered. I was like, oh, I'm excited, I'm ready to feel empowered now that I can own this identity that I know I have it. But then
Mhm.
I was just kind of thinking, I was like, well, there was actually something kind of quite nice about speculating because I could always speculate if I had something or not. And now that I can't speculate, it's okay, this is something I'm gonna have to kind of live with my whole life. And it's a lot to think about when you struggle with it and now you realize you're gonna have it for a long time and you have to learn how to manage it. And so it wasn't necessarily as empowering as I thought it'd be. Now it is because like I can explain myself better, I understand, and I can see the symptoms. I can talk to someone about how I'm feeling, and just you say I have this, and they'll understand. So it like kind of like gets rid of some of the barriers when you're having to explain yourself, but it is still kind of hard to swallow that you kind of have to experience that for probably your whole life. For me,
So you kind of liked behind the scenes. I mean, I guess subconsciously you kind of liked the mystery of it before you were diagnosed in
kind
a
of.
way. Yeah. You kind of were like, oh, okay. It's kind of like you're um being your own detective for your brain. It seemed like trying to
Yeah,
fit.
kind of. And that's kind of, I think it's very similar to just kind of how a lot of people are. That a lot of people are like, I don't know what I have. Like, especially when it comes to a physical condition, like, oh,
Oh yeah.
I don't know what disease this is. I'm just gonna like keep guessing or no, I'll be okay. And it's like, well, when you
Yeah.
actually get diagnosed, like, oh no, you have this condition. You're like, oh, yeah, now you have to kind of learn how to deal with it or learn to live with it
It's
or
real.
whatever treatment you're gonna have. And so it is kind of like that. And so it does make sense actually.
Yeah. So after you got diagnosed, did you start so you got diagnosed by like your regular MD, or did you go to a psychiatrist
Went to a
or
psychiatrist.
okay. Yeah, that's always important, going to a specialist. I always
Hmm.
like to emphasize that if possible, because your regular MD more than likely is just gonna they don't they only know what they know. So I mean, I had initially gotten my script from an MD for a long time, and at a certain point, they were like, "I don't feel comfortable prescribing this to you anymore. You need to see a specialist." Because I was kind of like, it was just easier to see my MD, and I was like, so,
Hmm.
and she was gonna write me the script that I needed, and it was working at the time. So, uh, but I'm glad I see a specialist now, and also uh, also do therapy as well. Did you jump into that as well? In addition to the,
Uh, oh, I was gonna say yeah, I tried therapy.
I'm not trying to call you out. Sorry. I'm just trying.
No, it's okay. No, it's I tried therapy. I went through like one or two therapists.
Yeah.
Just wasn't finding the right vibe that I felt was aligned with me.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
so
it's tough.
I haven't explored it since, but it's something I'm always thinking about of doing so I have someone just beyond a psychiatrist.
It's very important to find someone. It's like being in a relationship with somebody. You have
Hmm.
to have that connection. And I, coming from someone who has had, I don't know how many therapists, I totally understand where you're coming from. And but you're talking about it, you're advocating, and that's therapy in itself too. So some people overlook that and sharing your experience and not bottling that in and
Yeah, yeah.
doing doing the manly thing we were talking about earlier where we um so yeah, I wanted to talk about that too because a lot of advocacy as we were talking about before we started recording was like yeah, men need to be more emotional, men need to be more vulnerable. And yeah, there's parts of that's true. Obviously, we need to not bottle our emotions or be afraid to show them. But I think men's mental health advocacy still has a long way to go. Is something we agree on.
It does, and as I was saying before, a lot of the issue with, like, the current narrative, which is, like, men need to cry, men need to be
Yeah.
emotional, and it's a nice message, but what's beyond that? Like, are you actually creating a space for men to do that? In my
Mhm.
opinion, I don't think so. And so you can't just expect someone to shift their mindset from what they've been probably conditioned to for a long time. Even myself personally, like when I say, "Oh, men need to cry," it's like I don't cry in front of people. I just don't. I don't find it comfortable.
I'm the same way. Yeah.
Right. It's like, but again, like, oh, we could trace it back and say, well, men have been conditioned this way. It's like, okay, probably. And so you can't expect someone to do something they're uncomfortable with.
Mm.
You have to wait. You have to patiently kind of hold their hand through it. That's exactly how it needs to be done because you can't just go, in my opinion, say, oh, just men need to cry more. And it's like, for men, a lot of them can't do that. And they do see it as a weakness in front of their partner. I don't think it is. But for them, they do. And so
Yeah.
you really have to be patient, understanding that there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to do that. You can't just be throwing out messages without any follow-up. Like, how do we actually make sure that men can feel emotional, feel vulnerable in a safe place? Because I've known many, and this is the sad thing, I've known a lot of men that have been open about their vulnerabilities and their emotions. And because people know that that is very sensitive for a man to do, they use it against them. And so sometimes when I look at that, I'm like, we have to be very understanding that there are men that have been vulnerable, that have come out of whatever they were experiencing, and it was used against them because they know that men's emotions are fragile because it is very hard to do that as a man, and so that is a scary thing. So there's a lot of things that come into it. It's not.
Mhm.
I don't think it's as black and white as it's being painted,
No, 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 it's not.
and I also think that if you're going to talk about like the term silence is killing us, like the silence of men's emotions is what's leading to male suicide, is so simplified. I mean, suicide is a very complex issue. It's not as
Mhm.
simple as I'm keeping my emotions bottled up, so I'm going to go unalive myself. I think it's a lot more serious than that, and there's a lot more, and there could be also a lot more underlying issues that are happening, issues that I think people need to be advocating for. If it's men's health, or if it's men's domestic violence, or if it's men's suicide or men's sexual assault. There's a lot of issues that men do face, that I think women and men face kind of together. It's just it's different. They
Mhm.
experience them differently, but it's still like similar issues, like issues of domestic violence. Men experience domestic violence too, and it's a lot of the narrative we don't hear about a lot, and so that it could be an underlying issue of men's suicide. I don't know, but there's a lot of more issues that can be addressed rather than just the silence, because again, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, obviously that's part of it. It's a start, but
Definitely.
yeah, feel like yeah, like you said, there's a long way to go, and I feel like it's progressed though, and it's if you're anything like me, you're impatient and you want it to all be good now, and I think most of us are like that. They want that instant gratification, like I want this to be. Why is this not better? Uh,
Mhm.
and I struggle with that too personally, like. Because I'm trying to be an advocate and share my experience with people and let them know that, it's okay to share your experience. It's okay to talk about these things. And I've been trying to brainstorm ways as someone who creates content to really boost that narrative and boost that goal of, advocating for men's mental health. Because I just noticed that it's been. I was talking about it with my last with one of my last guests,
Mhm.
and we went over the fact that there's not that many male influencers that are mental health related.
Mhm.
The
Right.
maj the majority of them are women, which is fine. And some of them are, they advocate for men's mental health in general. They don't specify, uh, but I think it's more relatable for uh for a man to see another man talking about something that they could be like, oh, I get that, like just like kind of a um, just it makes it more relatable. So I've been really trying to brainstorm ways I can do that and what I can talk about and what I can share because I'm a very, very open book. And that's very important to me
Mhm.
because I feel like I have almost an obligation as someone who has a following and has a voice uh, in the podcast world and the social media world that I have a duty to do to share openly and also help push us along progressively when it comes to mental health in general. And
I
I feel like you feel the same way. I'm not trying to assume that, but I would guess we're on the same page there.
No, yeah, definitely. And I noticed that. But what's interesting, there are a lot of male influencers, but a lot of them are like physical health people. That's what I've noticed that they're,
Oh, yeah, I
yeah,
have a
so like
couple
the,
buddies that are doing really well with that.
no, and
But
that's great. Like, I think
yeah.
that's great. But again, it would be nice to have a mix of like men that are open about their mental health. And I love it when I see physical health people talk about mental health too.
Mm.
Uh, and they even relate it to their physical health where,
So it's
like
correlated.
it is. And then they'll talk about how, oh yeah, working out and doing this, it helps my mental health. Um, and so, and I also, I wanted to say that, the way that we define vulnerability, is interesting. Like it's gonna how vulnerability presents itself is gonna be very different from other people. And so it's just when I do hear the term like men need to be vulnerable, it's like, well, we also need to explore what that vulnerability means. It's not gonna be every person's gonna express their vulnerability differently.
Hmm.
Men are gonna express it differently, and women are gonna express it differently. And that's just kind of how it is. And they're both valid, they're both important in their own right. So it's like we also have to look at, all the emotions and all how men can express themselves and be vulnerable. It's not as simple as, just the common trope that I've seen. And so if we can like explore just how men can be vulnerable in different ways, and again, a slow process and also creating a space where men can do that, I think we're doing I think that's a good promising direction for it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we'll have to do some more brainstorming. But and collaborating. That's another thing is just we need to work together on this and really push the narrative or
Mhm.
not narrative. I hate that word. Uh, but you know what I'm getting at. But I also, yeah, wanted to talk about some of the things that you've done. I mean, you said you worked with NAMI,
Mhm.
and I love NAMI. I've worked with them a little bit before. They
Nice.
actually set me up with a guest one time that was really cool.
Very nice.
And yeah, so what's been your experience with NAMI and how'd you get connected with them?
Well, might as well go to the White House because that's where I got
Yeah.
connected with Nami, to be honest with you. I'll just start the story with that though. So it was
Yeah. Yeah.
November of 2021, and I saw that MTV was planning this White House event with several mental health nonprofits, and NAMI was one of them. I didn't
Hmm.
really know much about NAMI, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Uh, But when I looked at all the nonprofits, I was like, okay, stakes are high because I know these organizations, I've heard of them. And at the time, I was involved in Active Minds, which is like a university mental health coalition. And there's
Okay.
like different chapters across different universities in this country. And so that's how I learned about the opportunity. And then I just applied. And, I even had those voices tell me that I wasn't ready for something like that. And so I just kind of had to ignore it and just press submit. Like, do not let the anti-ego to stop you. And so
Mm,
um,
it's
I found
important.
out that I was semifinalist in January. Then I sent in a final application, got in February. It was a very surreal moment reading in the email that I was going to go to the White House as a guest, as someone who was invited. And so we had like a boot camp, and there was a lot of things happening until the actual event. Just connecting with people from the White House, all these mental health organizations. And then it was, the week of, I don't remember the exact week, but I think it was the second week of May in 2022, literally the week. And then the weekend was my graduation, which was really exciting. So I was like, can we please, hopefully I'll get there in time. But it was a very amazing experience just being in DC for this reason with this intention. And then just kind of walking through the White House, and you don't really, it was like you didn't realize you were inside the White House. It was interesting. Like we
Yeah.
went through like the security, and then we were just walking through. We're like, oh, we're in the White House. No, I'm telling you, it you just didn't realize it because you were just kind of walking through and you're like, oh, this is the White House. And again, it was just kind of like interesting to like just walk through and you didn't even like realize you were in. Again, I knew I was in because we went through security and stuff, but it was just this moment where like, wow, I'm actually in it, and this is what it looks like. And it's just super exciting. And then yeah, and then we did the actual event. It was broadcasted, and there were a lot of different partners there, which was really exciting. And that's where I got involved with NAMI because they had their NAMI Next Gen, which is their youth advisory board. They had their applications open like in October of 2022. And so I applied. And luckily I got in. They accepted 10 people. And so I did that last year. My term ended like in December or January. And so it was exciting to be involved with NAMI. Like they have um they're a prominent voice in the mental health space, and so I was able to get a lot of different opportunities to present, share my story. That was how I got to share my story on the news for the first time, which would probably be the best interview I ever do, mostly because um I was so nervous, and I think that those nerves let out like this another vulnerable side that I didn't think I was gonna say on television. Um, and it was really nice. And some people even saw it and reached out, and I was like, I can't believe you saw it. Like but it was amazing because it was this campaign that, Sinclair Broadcasting Group did where it was televised on like several of their stations, not just like one local channel, but I think it was on over 100. And so it was very nerve-wracking. And it wasn't just my interview, it was like a whole hour segment of all this different mental health. And it was really exciting to see like so there were different interviews, different experts, different advice that you can do to better your mental health. And I was the last interview, which was very cool. And so yeah, it was nice that my interview ended it and that they even did something like that because that's something I'm trying to work on right now, which is how do we actually get more televised mental health messages so people can be aware and be educated on mental health from the comfort of their home on television. I think the media can play a very important role, which goes back to why I'm passionate about communications.
Yeah. You said a lot there. So I want to talk about the news segment. Yeah. And how you said the anxiety kind of fueled the conversation a little bit. You kind of like used it more, you kind of flipped it as like as a superpower a little bit, or because obviously were you live or was it recorded?
No, it was not live, thank God.
St Still though, it's still a lot. I've
It
been on
was
the news.
a
I've been on the news a couple times, and yeah, it's intense.
It is. And so, like, especially since it was in person, because I did a news interview months later, but it was like on Zoom, which was very nice.
Yeah.
Because it was like, here at home. But it was very different because, like, again, first time on the news, and it was also, you know, in person. There was a studio, there was like a tons of cameras in their studio, and it was
Hmm.
getting a little nerve-wracking. And so,
Lights everywhere. Just
yes, and they even did my makeup and everything, which was just really cool. And so, I
nice.
wouldn't I wouldn't say it wasn't intentional though. I did not intentionally use my anxiety that way. I just think that it
No, I
just
don't think. Yeah, yeah. It just kind of. Yeah, it was a
and then
switch.
like if you watch that interview, my voice is so soft. Like the way I was talking was like almost like I was not whispering, but just like a loud whisper. That's so
Mm.
weird to say a loud whisper. But
I get it though.
that's the best way I can describe it because like I'm talking now, I wasn't talking like that. It was very much so Like almost like this sounds so weird, but to me, like when I watch, I was like, it feels a little ASMR to me. But that's how I take it. That's how I'm like, okay, I like it. It's like, oh, my voice is actually kind of really relaxing here, and
Yeah.
it feels vulnerable. Like it feels really purposeful. Like I was talking like that for the purpose of being vulnerable, but I wasn't. It just came out.
Yeah, that's that yeah, I can relate to that for sure because it's just you're on the spot. I mean, it's fight or flight kind of situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll have to go back and watch that for sure. And yeah, I'll obviously have that linked or any links you want me to put in the description for you. I will definitely do that. I like to do that for all my guests, of course. But a little bit more about the White House, though. So tell us a little, just because it's interesting, like going through that process of like once you get there, describe what happens when you get there, because I don't even know. I mean, I've never been to DC. I don't pay that much attention uh to that because I imagine the security is insane. I would assume. Or,
Um, no, in
or
my
it's
opinion, I
it's
think that the
probably more low
security.
key. It's probably more low key. Like they don't want you to know, but I'm sure you're like they're paying attention, you know?
So they're definitely paying attention, but like,
Yeah.
going through security, it was like not as intense as I thought it'd be. But they do have like security all over the place. Like every corner you're reaching, there's like three like guards basically. And so it's very intense.
Mhm.
But going through it, I don't think it was as intense. It was kind of like just going through airport security. But less intense because like it's not like there was a lot of people in line. I think for that purpose, we were the only ones there. But of course, people at the event, there were a lot of guests though. So, but at the time, I think we were like the only ones kind of going through, which is really cool. Um, but yeah, so I don't know the way it felt, and I also tried to stay grounded because I'm sure as you know, when you overthink things, things just happen so much quicker. And
Mhm.
so
Oh
actually,
yeah.
when you overthink something, it can feel slower, but it can also feel faster. I don't know how that makes sense, but it does. And so
Oh, I get it. I get it.
yeah, like, all of us advocates were in this room and like people were talking and taking pictures. I did that too, but I was like, let me stop talking. Let me just sit down and not do anything because
Yeah.
it's gonna end very soon. Like it's gonna end in like 5 minutes. That's how it's gonna feel. And it did. It felt like it ended so quickly, but I think because I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, just feel grounded, think about it, meditate to what like that you're here, that you're actually in this place, in the universe, and that everything you've gone through has led up to this exciting moment. And so it really gave me a perspective of kind of looking back on my life. Sounds like I was like in deep thought. No, these are just some things I was thinking about. I wasn't like sitting there meditating for a half an hour. It was just like sitting there for like a minute to myself for 5 minutes. I can't remember how much time I used
Mhm.
because there was so much going on. I wanted to stay grounded and I didn't want it to end quickly. And it didn't because of that. I know I said before it ended quickly because time is just going to move quickly. But because again, I grounded myself, I appreciate it a lot more than I thought I would have if I didn't do that. It would have just gone by too quickly. I
Were
hope that
you,
makes sense.
yeah, you're able to live in the moment and
Yeah.
really appreciate it. As far as meditation goes, is that a practice that you implement uh pretty regularly, or is that kind of like one of those things where like I need to slow things down and
It's not a regular practice. I wish it was.
same.
But
Yeah.
I just need to kind of do it more. And I need to set the intention to do it more because when I do actually do it, I'm like really relaxed.
Hmm.
I meditated recently because I had like a really interesting interview and I was really nervous for it. And
Hmm.
I was like, just relax, just calm down. And I meditated. I have an oracle deck that I actually opened up. And so I do appreciate some of the spirituality stuff and it really does shape me with who I am, and a lot of my family's into it. And so I have an Oracle deck from a good friend of mine. I hadn't opened it because I tell myself that I don't read Oracle cards until I'm very much ready for it. So
Hmm.
if I have a new deck and I've only had like three, I thought about opening it, but I was like, let me open it when I really need the guidance. So I opened it recently because of the interview. And then it was interesting because the card that I flipped was a card that was about travel and adventure. And again, that's very open-ended. And that's the point. You're supposed to interpret it how you think it's going to guide you. And so I was like, that can mean exactly what I want right now. Or it can mean a different direction that I'm not really looking for, but it's still an adventure. And so Oracle does help me sometimes because it gives me a guidance like from the universe or whatever the cards are, what you interpret that as. And so I do try and incorporate, meditation and mental health and all these different components because I do think that there's several ways you can heal and several ways you can get guidance. And so that's one of them. It's nothing like traditional therapy or traditional psychiatry if you need that, but it is a good, it's good guidance for when you need it.
Yeah, I've never gotten into that myself, but I've heard a lot of people who've experimented with that.
And I'm not like super into it. Like I'm not like someone who reads
Yeah,
every day. That's what I like about it. It gives you a book that you can read. And so if you just like, I just need to flip a card and see what's going on, that's it. There are some people that are really into it where like they can read you and they can get visions. I'm nowhere near that.
yeah,
I just like reading it for myself. Occasionally I'll read my friend, but I like reading myself because it's kind of like tapping into your subconscious that you're probably not aware of, and it's very helpful.
yeah. It's interesting for sure.
Mhm,
Perspective. Yeah, we're all looking for that perspective on what we should be doing with our lives, or how we should handle certain situations, things like that.
mhm,
As far as the depression goes, I'm curious because with me, when it comes to depression and anxiety, mainly what happens, it can go the other way, but more so recently, I've been battling anxiety a lot lately with because I have OCD, so it's an anxiety disorder, and I deal with that on a day-to-day basis,
mhm.
and that can cause depression.
Yeah.
So is yours more, because obviously it's different for other people. Does your anxiety cause depression or does your depression cause anxiety? It's kind of a tricky question.
Yes, but I also think that it's both.
Yeah.
And so it really just depends. And so sometimes I will feel anxious and
Hmm.
then it will lead into depression because whatever it is, like maybe my anxiety is too much that it leads me to feel depressed because I'm anxious. Like, why
Hmm.
am I feeling anxious? And it leads me to being depressed, or I'm very depressed. And I was telling someone this that, it's like sometimes I can't catch a break because I'm involved in a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
And I do, it's like a blessing, but then it's not because like I love being involved in stuff. I love contributing, but sometimes I feel so burned out,
Mm.
especially when it's connected to mental health. Like someone told me that recently where they were talking like, as an advocate, sometimes it's better if you're an advocate and you don't have the lived experience. And I was like, that's interesting. Like you need both, they're saying. But they're saying that you definitely need folks that don't have the lived experience too, because they can come at it a little more objectively than someone with lived experience. And I'm like, that's quite interesting. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And they're saying if you're a big advocate and you're always sharing your story, you might get emotionally burnt out because your advocacy is so connected to your personal life. I'm like, wow, okay. And so I also like evaluating like what I should put my energy into now because I never thought of it that way. Like I'm involved in a lot of mental health stuff. Maybe I should relax because maybe that's what's leading to more depression. I don't know. And so what was I? Yeah, I was gonna say the thing before is it's a blessing and not because, when I'm involved in stuff, I feel really energized. And I feel like it gives me value, it gives me meaning, but then I get I get burnt out and then I tell
Hmm.
myself I need to relax and not do as much. And then I get really anxious because I'm not doing anything or
Yeah.
I'm not doing enough. So it's like I can't catch a break. I cannot be sometimes in the middle with this because again, if I'm doing too much, I'm energized, but I get burnt out. And if I'm not doing anything, I get really anxious because I'm not doing enough. And I get the whole FOMO where like I'm not doing enough. I'm not gonna get
Yeah.
more opportunities. It's a lot.
Oh, I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Totally relate to that because it's a double-edged sword almost. Like, yeah, I get to the point where I get burnt out, and I have people tell me that I'm doing too much all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm just like, yeah, I get it, but at the same time, me having idle time is not usually good.
Yeah.
And it can be. There was times where things were a little bit more balanced, but I am getting more opportunities and I don't want to miss out on those opportunities. Just like you were talking about that fear of missing out. I just learned the acronym FOMO within the last 6 months, by the way.
Oh,
I don't know.
nice.
I don't know how I missed out on that, but missed out on FOMO. Um, but yeah, so I totally get that because I I'm kind of in that state right now where yeah, I'm just doing a lot. I'm working my way to trying to get promoted at work and trying to keep up with the podcast.
Mhm.
I also do stand-up comedy and I just hosted a show last night and that's a lot of that brings me a lot of anxiety in a good way though. But it can burn me out like after the show after I host a show, I'm usually like, oh, and it's just
Yeah.
like finally it's like I'm waiting for it to be over and not really enjoying it as much. So I need to check my priorities on that. That's why I don't host shows all year round because it's just very um it can be very intense and because you want the show to go well, you want your performers to be treated well, you want to pay them well, but that, if not enough people show up, usually most shows it's what you get paid. Some shows are nice and they'll pay you no matter what. Other times it's based on the door.
Mm.
And if not a lot of people show up, then, like my show last night, I mean, I always pay my comics way too much. I'm very much a people pleaser and I'm working on that. But also at the same time, like, you know, they were basically hired to do a job. And as a host, you take more of the risk. And I ended up not making very much money at all, but they all got paid and they seemed to be happy. So I'm not doing it for the money. The money's nice, especially when I put a lot of effort and time into it. Uh,
Mhm.
but I need to focus on. I tried to enjoy the show and live in the moment as much as I could last night, and I'll either be future tripping, but most of the time I'm doing a lot of ruminating lately. I don't know if you have any experience with that, but just ruminating like situations where you're like, oh man, I wish I would have done that better, or I wish I would have done
Oh,
that differently,
yeah.
things like that. Mine's a little bit more deeper than that because it's related to OCD and
Okay.
because OCD is very much a doubt disorder and you just doubt things and you're just like, man, what if I didn't do that or I could have done that better and then you catastrophize it and make it into this whole big thing
Yeah.
and then you're just like replaying looping stuff in your head and it's just
Yeah. I
it's
don't,
a
and I don't have OCD, but I understand that because like I don't usually share this because like when I'm around people like people think I'm very positive and I'm a positive person for them,
yeah, oh yeah,
but naturally I'm very negative. Like you give me like one scenario, I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna get fired. I'm the worst situation I'm gonna think about, and that's gonna loop through my head. I
oh
don't.
yeah,
And I'm just like, ugh, can it stop? Like, I hate being naturally negative. Like, I know a lot of people say glass half full. No, I'm very much glass half empty. I don't think a lot of people like saying that, but I am. But
yeah,
doesn't mean I'm not nice or positive or bubbly. It's just my mind naturally goes to that.
same here, yeah. It's one of those things where we're our own worst enemy. That's
Yeah.
and I'm so good at I subconsciously can do it. Like people won't even notice that I'm like going through something when I'm going through it. I'm out and about or I'm, at an event or whatever. I'm at dinner with somebody. They won't notice. Certain people have gotten better at it, but I'm very good at being a chameleon and just blending in and going through the motions and making sure that, you know, no one knows that I'm struggling. And I don't even really do that on purpose. It's just like
Mm,
an automatic response.
mhm.
Because I don't want to bring the mood down or,
Burden people. Feel like you're burdening people.
yeah, you don't want to burden people. And it's funny because, like, on the other side of things, you're like I'm sitting here telling people, like, talk about what's going on. And then you're just like, do as I say, not as I do. It's kind of like one of those situations.
Well, it's hard though. I think that speaks to a greater issue happening with the mental health stigma.
Mhm.
And that, again, even if you don't do it intentionally, you never know if, again, subconsciously that's your automatic reaction because there's still a shame attached to it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a subconscious shame too. It's not even like, you're like, you don't have anything to be ashamed of, dude. Like,
Right.
and people care about you. People are willing to listen to you. It's just like, yeah, it's a weird conundrum that we got going on sometimes.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you talked about sharing your story and constantly, and you're probably somebody, if you share your story a lot and you're advocating, you're probably talking to a lot of people and doing a lot of listening to, what they got going on in their life, because people know that you are someone that's not going to judge them, that's going to listen and,
Right.
um, maybe provide some feedback, but some people just need people to listen.
Oh yeah. Wow.
And I am that person for at least a few people, and people know that I am not going to, judge them. I'm going to listen and I'm understanding. I'm kind of like known throughout most of my friend group as the mental health guy because I do this podcast. So, uh, and which is fine, but at the same time, there's sometimes like people will call me and I'm like, I'm so burnt out, and it's nothing against them. I'm just like, I can't handle this right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I won't answer right away, but I'll make sure I try to call them back and because I don't want people to think I'm ignoring them either. But sometimes I just, want to tell people like, hey, this is a me day. I need to decompress. I need to do a reset. And but also at the same time, it's hard for me to do those reset days because I don't want to miss out on something, or I say like, man, you should be working on this. Because I do, a lot of different stuff. There's always something for me to be doing. There's never something like I'm never like done with what I'm doing, which is good and a bad thing. Because it helps keep me motivated. I have to have things to look forward to. Otherwise, I will get very depressed and I will isolate. I will sleep all the time. I will avoid everything. I will avoid everyone. And
Yeah, that's exactly how I am.
it's a scary place to be in. It's very dark. And it feels like every time I get in those situations, each time it's darker. I don't know if a lot of people have talked about that, but I've shared that experience with a friend of mine who's actually a little bit older than I am, um, and he's also in recovery like I am. Except I don't know if you knew that about my story, but yeah, I've been sober for, I'm not saying this to brag, but it's just like
Yeah.
over 6.5 years. I don't know what the exact. Um, I got sober in May 30th of 2017. So, and that's when I kind of started really getting, well, not right away, but focusing on my mental health because it was definitely part of my using and my addiction and my what I was doing was to try to combat how I was feeling and change how I was feeling. So, if I'm feeling low, I'll get this substance, or if I'm feeling, too anxious, there's a substance for that. Like I can be my own doctor, and bad idea. I don't recommend that. I don't recommend being your own doctor.
Mhm.
Um, using WebMD. I've actually heard that. uh, I've interviewed therapists before, and I remember one therapist telling me that that's been a huge issue. Um, that they're running into as specialists is people diagnosing themselves
Yeah.
and coming in like, no, I have this, and like trying to like say, hey, I did my research, and like fighting the doctors and fighting the specialists. It's like, don't do that. I mean, you may be onto something, but hear them out. Like there's a reason they went to a lot of school. They pay
A
attention.
lot.
Yeah, a lot of school. Yeah, because people have told me, hey, you'd make a really good therapist. And I'm like, I think I would, and I would enjoy it. But school, a lot of school, and me, I was a horrible student. That was a while ago. That was when I was partying more and things like that. But I feel like I'm doing what I can now, and I feel like eventually maybe I'll do that, go back to school. And, but right now, this is enough. Doing the podcast, creating content, that's my way of giving back to the mental health community at this time. Because I can't, I can't swing school right now. I'm just not in the headspace for it.
No, and school is also just not for everyone. And especially for people that are neurodiverse, it's especially a struggle. And so I know people in my life that, school just wasn't for them, and mostly because school has a specific formula, and it's
Hmm.
not always inclusive or accessible to everyone.
Exactly. Everybody learn. I'm a different kind of learner. Like I'm a very visual, hands-on type of guy. To really like, I'm like a throw me to the wolves kind of guy. Like let me learn. I'll fail and then I'll learn. Um, and that's not how traditional schooling is. So, but I obviously understand. Like I can't just. I get why I can't just sign up and be a therapist and start seeing patients at the same too, because I need more.
Yeah.
You know, I understand why that's important. Um, but schooling is not it's not for everyone. You're exactly right. So I feel like this is important, and there's been times where I've talked about this many times where I'm like, man, like, does anyone really care that I'm doing this? Or does anyone like, cause I get that you're like you were saying, that
Mhm.
glass half empty approach. And in my head, I'm like, is anyone really paying attention to this? Like, am I just spinning my wheels here? Like, and I pay attention to the numbers sometimes too much, like with stats and listeners. And it's like, am I really, you know, is this really worth my time? Because I put a lot of time into this. It's like, not only do I have to record the episode, I have to listen to the whole episode again, edit it, I do all the artwork, I do everything because I'm one of those guys like if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. So that's also something I struggle with, and that's an asking for help thing, but usually asking for help when it comes to stuff like that, I have to pay somebody, and this is not um podcasting is not a huge money maker right, especially right away. I'm just now getting to the point where people are like, "Hey, we'd be interested in sponsoring your podcast." I'm just like, really? Sure. And like, it's surreal to me, and I'm going to be very selective about who does that too. Cause I'm not going to just take money from anybody. I want my listeners to, get a good, an advertiser that makes sense to them. And it's something that's going to be beneficial to their lives.
Mhm.
It's
No, yeah, I mean,
something that I would use myself.
right. No. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, no. Well, I always say that, numbers don't matter, the impact matters. And sometimes impact is really hard
Yep,
to measure,
it
but you just
is.
have to tell yourself that the impact is happening though.
Yeah, and it's sometimes I want to like seek reassurance and be like, put a post out
Right.
there, be like, please tell me I'm doing good, but I don't want to be that guy either, you know? uh, please
No,
give me,
it's real nice to no, it's real nice to have validation and
yeah,
what you're doing is worth it. But I don't know, this conversation, your conversation with other people, I think that's worth it.
yeah. And I really enjoyed this conversation too. I've noticed that every time I have an interview with somebody, I get something out of it
Okay.
myself personally. Just being able to have that conversation. And I'm just a people person. I like talking to people. And like I was telling you earlier, I'm glad you reminded me about the time I did see that. But yeah, there's like I could just have these conversations. If I could just do this all day for a full-time job and just do podcasting, sign me up. That'd be incredible.
I would.
But it's a long game. I think eventually, as long as I stick with it and remain consistent, it could be at least a good, you know, good side gig for me. And I also have another business I'm starting that I really am passionate about. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, I want to be able to work for myself. So I'm available for people and available to do advocacy work and volunteer work and really try to make a difference. And right now I'm at the point where I can't do that quite yet. I still have to work my 9 to 5 job, and I try to make a difference wherever I can there because I work in customer service and I help people with health benefits, and it can be very intense. And I try to do my part in helping people there. And I once even talked to somebody and shared my experience with somebody who was checking into rehab, and I was like, dude, you're talking to the right guy. I get it. Like, just letting them know that, hey, do what you got to do. We'll get this figured out. Like, people worry about like losing their jobs, and I've worried about that sometimes too, like where I get really bad and into a mental headspace where I'm like, man, I wish I could just take a leave. And I can, but I'm scared of that. I'm scared it's going to impact my career um, by doing that. But there's a reason those types of programs exist.
Mhm.
So, and yeah, it's a fear of missing out because like, oh yeah, because right now I'm going through a process of trying to get promoted, and at the same time, I got a lot going on in my life and going on in my head, and been very anxious lately and trying to combat that. And I don't want them to think that my mental illness is a flight risk,
Mhm.
for me not to be able to do this job. And
Unfortunately, there are people that believe that.
yeah,
And I think if and I think if you are at an employment where you're getting those vibes or even say that, I really hope you go somewhere else because you should not have to put up with that.
yeah, I'm not even getting those vibes.
That's good. No, yeah.
It's in my head.
Yeah.
It
No, I understand. I definitely understand where like
because my company's
it's
pretty progressive, pretty good about that kind of thing. And it's something it's kept me there. The little things like that have kept me there, and the people and the culture.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
there's a little bit of the culture that's shifted a little bit that I didn't necessarily prefer, but that happens everywhere. But like for the most part, though, the people I work with care, and we want each other to be happy at the end of the day. And that's very important to have good coworkers. And but I work remote too though. So it's like I don't really get like that full experience with my coworkers.
mhm,
So I have to make sure that I'm having conversations with other people, not just over messaging, but like maybe like this or even in person, calling a friend, going to, you know, going over to a friend's house or going over to see my cousin or um getting out of the house is very, very important. So anybody that works from home, get out of the house as much as you can because I mean, you're in the house way too often already. It's, it can really impact you, especially as it starts to get nicer. Go for a walk.
Mhm.
I'm preaching a little bit. Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, no, thank you.
Yeah. Are you in a work from home position or do you go to the office or is it
No, it's hybrid, so I
hybrid?
go in twice a week, which is a good balance.
I like that. I like the hybrid model a lot.
Hmm.
I, that would be an option for me. Unfortunately, the closest office to me is at least 2.5 hours away.
Yeah,
So it's like, can't really do that.
no.
Um, but yeah, that'd be cool. If I lived in Des Moines, which is probably at least familiar with Des Moines because it's our capital, uh, then it would make sense. But I also, I own a home here. I'm pretty grounded. Have a lot of good friends and connections, and I don't want to, like I said, I'm a people pleaser by nature, so I feel like if I were to move, I would let a lot of people down or something, I'm always that's like my biggest fear, I think, is letting people down or or maybe be or yeah, or possibly being a burden, but the more the letting people down is a huge thing for me. I'm not sure how much you can relate to that, but I know we gotta
I
wrap
can.
up here pretty shortly, but any closing comments you wanted to make before we wrap this up? Let people know that you know, my biggest thing is letting people know that, obviously it's cliche, but letting people that are not know that they're not alone. So if you had like any advice for somebody that's really like stuck in a rut right now, what would be your suggestion? What's something you do when you're like stuck in a rut and like really like feel like, that those times when you get depressed where you're like,
Mhm.
this is it. I'm just going to be depressed the rest of my life. When that's not true, but your mind's telling you otherwise.
Yeah, usually when oh gosh, I don't know. Like, it's so hard because usually when I'm stuck in those situations, I stay there for a bit
You
because
have to you have to power through it.
for me, I naturally get out of it. It's never like I take a proactive approach, which probably isn't the best. And so I guess my advice is like just think about or like ponder why it is you feel stuck. Like what's making you feel stuck? There are some things that are out of your control.
Hmm.
If that's the case, stop trying to focus too much on those things then. I'm not saying don't focus on them because I know that's impossible. And just try to challenge the things that you can actually control so you feel like you have more freedom, more power in your own life. Because if you're going to try and change things that you have no control over, you're not going to succeed ever because it's not in your control.
Mm,
Try and only focus on things you can change the outcome of or try to change the outcome of. And so that's what I would say. And so that means maybe something that you are seeing that you're missing. Maybe it's having that conversation, or I'm missing this, or I'm missing a social life. And just start slowly. Start with something like what interests you. And I'm still feeling that 'cause I'm still new to DC. I haven't been here long. I've only been here for a year, and I'm slowly making my way into groups. It's not easy, and so whatever it is to slowly get your foot in the door with anything, if it's just attend a small event of people you know, or if you don't know, there's always Meetup where you can meet up with different people.
mhm.
And so I know that's asking a lot for some people, but even for me, but I think at the end of the day, it can help you.
I appreciate that, Zane. I needed to hear that too, so I'm sure other people will appreciate that too.
Great.
And yeah, we're right at time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, me too.
And I really enjoyed the conversation. And I appreciate everyone for listening or watching, however they're consuming this podcast. But until next time, this is Colin signing off from the Modern Day Overthinker podcast. Everyone have a good day.